Hey good people, Batavia here. I have 3 lessons learned that I want to share with you. I'll see you in a sec. Okie doke, so before we dig in, 2 housekeeping items. First, if you haven't done so already, please do subscribe to my channel. And if you subscribe, hit that bell so you'll be notified each and every week as I share more garden joy. I appreciate it and my channel appreciates it too. The second housekeeping item, this 3 lessons learned in this garden season is a challenge that's going around, and I was tagged by 2 great gardeners. I want to include their information in the description below. Check out their channels, subscribe to their channels, watch their videos, like their videos. The first person was Angela at Angela's Busy Bees Garden and Homestead. So she's out in Tennessee, I believe, and she has a really lovely garden area where she's growing all kinds of vegetables for her family. And she even has some fruit trees, which I'm totally jealous about, but that's another story. So check her out. Her information's below. And then one of my neighbors, I consider her my neighbor since she's in Michigan. It is Michigan Garden Gal. So Taylor over in Michigan, she has a beautiful flower area where she grows both annuals and perennials, and it is so lovely. And then she also does some small gardening for vegetables. She has a garden bed as well as some container gardening that she does, and she is just so sweet and supportive as well. So please do check both of those channels out. So those are the housekeeping items. Now let's get into the lessons learned. So we're going to do a rapid fire version of it first, and then we'll dig in further. So the rapid fire version is lesson number 1, plant still. Lesson number 2, don't be stingy with seeds. And lesson number 3, mulch early and probably mulch often. So digging in, lesson number 1, plant still. They'll steal if you let them. They'll steal water from each other. They'll steal nutrients. They'll steal sun. So when planting, for me, it's hard because I want to plant all of the things and I want to cram a lot in my small space. And sometimes that works out for me and other times it doesn't. The best example of this lesson this year is with garden bed number 5 in my backyard. So that garden bed has a number of leafy greens in it, and I planted 3 different varieties of kale. And what happened with that is I had, let's say, a row of kale. I generally use the square foot garden method. So I had in 1 square foot a Russian kale plant. Right next to it was a dinosaur or lacinato kale plant. And then next to it was a curly kale plant. So those plants actually started, the first 2 Russian kale from seed, as well as the dinosaur kale. I dropped seed and, sowed that seed, it germinated, and, the plant grew up. The curly kale was a starter plant that I purchased. So right away, that plant had a head start on the others that were in the bed. And what I didn't consider when I was kind of spacing my plants was how big and wide the curly kale plant grows, as well as how big and wide the Russian kale plant grows. And then that's generally okay, but what ended up happening is that dinosaur kale, it doesn't grow as big or wide as the other 2. So the 2 plants that are, let's say, on the end here ended up really kind of growing up and then wide and ultimately kind of shadowing out, because as they grew together, they shadowed out that dinosaur kale that was basically underneath those plants. So it couldn't get as much sun. I imagine that perhaps when I watered the bed, the larger plants ended up, kind of sucking up some of the water that the dinosaur kale plant could have used. So that's, again, just something to consider as you're planning your space. Consider the size of the plant as it grows and once it's fully mature, and how much space that's going to need. And unfortunately, this is a lesson that I learned year over year, but it's recorded now, so we have evidence of it. So as I go into next season, I will have no reason not to make adjustments. Lesson number 2 is don't be stingy with seeds. So truth moment, I am pretty new when it comes to planting using seeds. In my previous gardens in previous years, I would purchase starter plants from grocery stores, from garden centers, from nurseries, and that's what made up my garden. But kind of coming into last year's growing season, I have been thinking about expanding some of the things that I planted. I wanted to plant some different things and grow some different things. And so I tried my hand at sowing seeds. And generally speaking, it was successful. But even coming into this year, as I expanded further, I kind of took a bad habit forward, and that is really being stingy with seeds. So if a seed package says plant 1 seed per planting hole, I'll plant 1 seed. If the packaging suggests planting 2 seeds in that 1 planting hole, I'll plant 1 seed. And that's great when that 1 seed that I use germinates. But in the cases where it doesn't, it costs me something. So quick example, if on June 1st I plant 1 seed for Russian kale, and let's say the package calls 7 to 10 days before that seed would likely germinate. And on June 10th, I come out and I look and I don't see anything yet. But this June has been super duper damp. It was, kind of cool. So maybe it just needs a few more days. So I come out and look again on June 15th. And June 15th, there's still nothing. But I have some stuff going on. Life's happened. And I'm not prepared to get in the garden and start planting again. So you look up and it's June 20th. So in my growing season, I'm in zone 6B. My growing season is pretty short. So I've just lost almost 3 weeks with my method of planting the 1 seed and hoping that seed germinated. So a lot of gardeners, and this is no revelation, this has been going on for many, many, many years. A lot of gardeners will plant in that 1 hole 2 seeds, sometimes 3 seeds, and their goal is to increase the odds of a plant germinating. So I am reformed. I have learned the error in my ways, and as recent as this October, as I planted the last of my fall plantings for this year, I threw seeds all over the place. So I went from being super duper stingy to just being, seeds in every space I can put it in and as many as I can put down. And while that's kind of one extreme versus another, I won't do that necessarily as I go forward. I definitely will stop being stingy with seeds and increase my odds. So that is lesson number 2. Don't be stingy like me, or the former version of me. Lesson number 3 is to mulch early. So mulch is great. It has a lot of benefits for the garden area. I use primarily wood chip mulch. So mulch can help suppress weeds. That can limit the time that you need to spend actually pulling weeds. Mulch can help cool down the soil when the weather is super hot. It can help warm or keep the soil warm when the weather is cold. It can help retain moisture in the soil, which is really important for a lot of your plants. And while I knew this, I didn't apply this method to my front yard garden as early as I should have. So as I expanded my garden area to the front yard, which I'm still so excited about how that turned out. As I expanded, I have 2 beds in the front that are about 10 foot by 3.5 foot. And I started planting in that area, seeds that I sowed as well as starter plants. And I watched things start to come up and grow, but I didn't protect those beds. I didn't protect that soil. I left that soil bare for probably weeks if I think back. And it's in one of the sunniest spaces in my garden area. So that sun was just beating down on that soil, day after day. I was watering daily, sometimes twice a day. And in some instances, that's what it takes in some garden areas. But I knew that was happening because I wasn't mulching. I hadn't mulched. That water wasn't being retained. So again, my lesson there is to mulch early and maybe even mulch often. So I've learned that lesson for sure, and I'll be sure to do that in my future garden beds and planting. So those are my 3 lessons. Let's see. Plant still. Number 2 is don't be stingy with seeds. Number 3 is mulch early and often. I want to tag 3 other garden channels, and I have their information here. I want to make sure I get their channel names right. Team Benson They're out in Arizona, and Tiffany, as you'll see in many of the videos, she's one half of Team Benson, and I'm going to leave her information and their channel information below. They're in Arizona, and they're gardening in their home, and that alone deserves, for you to check them out. The growing conditions are a bit more challenging than in some of the areas that some of us garden in. And then Midwest Gardener, Jim is in Kansas, and he has been gardening for a number of years. He's been on YouTube and sharing some of his information for a number of years as well. Super informative channel. Be sure to check Jim out as well. And then the last person I'll tag is Some Room to Grow. So Greg is in Iowa, and they want to keep gardening fun. They have informational videos. They do some videos in the tutorial style. So those three channels, Team Benson, Midwest Gardener, and Some Room to Grow. Information's below. Subscribe, like, watch, as well as the first two that I mentioned at the top of the video, and that is Midwest Garden Gal and Angela's Busy Bees Garden and Homestead. So check all of those channels out. I wouldn't send you over there if it wasn't good stuff to be had. So I appreciate you watching. Thank you so much for spending the time with me, and I shall see you all on the next one.